Welcome to today's episode of Wisdom Wednesday, where we're going to look at what it really takes to succeed, not just in business, but in health and in your health and wellness journey. So imagine walking into a big bank meeting with your pitch of your next business venture, and you show up without a plan. You haven't even really thought through the numbers, the risks, the goals, or the next steps. So how do you think that is going to go? Well, in our experience, that's how most people approach their mental, physical, nutritional, and experiential well-being. They do it really without a plan. So today, Dr. Faizan Emtiaz and I, myself, Shane Lakins, are going to explore what happens when we stop hoping our health works out and start treating it like a business venture. So if you're ready to make some health plans as we sharpen up that business plan for your health, let's dive in. Faizan, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here. And as Shane just mentioned, we're going to walk you through some of the things that we found have been quite effective in terms of helping entrepreneurs and business people navigate some of the early challenges and stressors associated with starting a new venture, going out of your comfort zone, leaving the familiarity of the that we're used to in our day-to-day routines. And so for the sake of this short presentation, we're really going to focus on what are the things that might impede progress in terms of entrepreneurs' beginnings, in terms of launching new ventures, and how psychologically, and then Shane will focus on physically, nutritionally, how those things can be impacted and impact people's health, wellness, and performance. So I wanted to actually start with something that I think is one of the biggest issues in our current economic and workplace environments, and that is this idea of multitasking. And so often if you ask people, do you multitask and how does it make you feel when you're doing it? You often get responses like, I do it all the time. When we're not multitasking, there's often a pushback in terms of not being productive or not working hard. And the reality is, if you look at the scientific literature, there's no real such thing as multitasking as it has been defined to us. And so the human brain does not have the capacity to be in two places at once. So I cannot be giving this presentation and reading an email or listening to another lecture. And so when you're using the same part of your brain, let's say the frontal lobes, which are associated with high-end cognitive tasks, you cannot multitask in that sense. What looks like multitasking in certain domains is actually called task switching, when you're doing two different things very fast or efficiently. So chefs, for example, get very good at slicing, then cutting, and then boiling. But that's not multitasking because they're taking turns between those things. The other thing that looks like multitasking but really isn't is when you're using different parts of the brain. So if you are cutting the grass and listening to a lecture on a podcast, that's not really multitasking because one is auditory and one is motor, physical. And so multitasking as it's defined in work is writing, listening, watching, being in a meeting, on your phone. These things often lead to, in terms of the impact, less performance and more negative affect because we feel that we're not being productive, and that has ramifications on our wellness. So the first thing we need to get away from is what do we actually do versus what's actually good for us based off of the literature that we have on the psychology of high performance. So from that, I wanted to just get right into it because we don't have an extended period of time today, and talk about what should you do in this very chaotic environment with a lot of uncertainty, with a lot of economic turmoil, with a lot of stress in the physical to help mitigate that stress. And specifically, we'll try to make as many connections to entrepreneurship as possible. And so one of the analogies that perhaps might be helpful for today is to think about, like if you think about a tropical storm, you have a lot of chaos. But right in the epicenter of it, you have what's called the eye of the hurricane, which is actually the least disruptive part of the entire storm. As you move out from that epicenter, it gets worse. But right in the heart of it, you have surprisingly and paradoxically, a lot of calmness. And so a lot of this can be framed in terms of, with everything happening around you, how can you sort of find that space in your life, in your work, performance endeavors? So one of the things that is interesting about the human mind is a lot of the times the stress and anxiety that we feel is not actually about something that will happen for sure, but about uncertainty. So it's the threat of pain and not pain itself, which causes us the most angst. And there was a very interesting study done at University College London where they split people in half, and half of them, they were for sure going to get a negative outcome. Let's say like a small shock or something like that. The other half of the group was going to have a 50% chance of getting the negative outcome. And what they found is the group that was 50% in the 50% category had significantly more stress than the group that was for sure going to get it, which doesn't make any sense because the 50% group has a 50% chance of not getting anything negative. But it's the threat. It's the possibility that things might go wrong. This might not work out. In terms of entrepreneurship, a lot of the stress and anxiety that you likely feel is just from the what ifs. It's not from any certainty of there's going to be a recession, or people are not going to invest, or businesses are not opening up their cash flows. It's what if this occurs? And what if this doesn't occur? And so how do we mitigate this uncertainty, this psychological uncertainty? Some of the things that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to go through about 3 best practices just for sake of time. And a lot of this is predicated on the work of Carol Dweck, who has looked at these 2 ways of looking at the world. One is an outcome orientation. This is where your success or failure is predicated on the outcomes. Did it work? Did the pitch land well? Did the organization buy into it or not? The other way of looking at the world in business is through something called a process orientation, where you're not determining everything based off of the outcome, but instead based off of the process. What have I done to get here? How can the feedback that I've received be beneficial for the future? Where is this company or endeavor or new venture now compared to where it was 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago? So instead of comparing to other people or outcomes, you're comparing to the self over time. And what they found is you being more process oriented leads to not only feeling better about your performance and wellness, but actually achieving much, much more because you're just not hamstrung. You're not adding all of the extra pressure. So what are the specific things? If we want to cover at least a couple of best practices that can help us find some of this calmness amidst all of the economic turmoil and uncertainty happening around us. One is something that's related to, we often find this in the sports psychology literature because there's so much chaos, there's so much physical upheaval, to just slow things down, to actually calm things down and to focus more on the day-to-day process again, instead of, well, what does this mean for the long picture? How will this impact me in 20 years from now? What will this do to my bank account, etc.? And it's interesting, this idea of being mindful. We often hear about it in the meditation literature, but I think you can really distill it down to something much more simple psychologically, because this idea of being mindful or being present has been around forever. It's found in all of the traditional ancient traditions and religions. It's something that you will readily find across history, across time. And it basically, you can distill it down to 2 features: mindful awareness and mindful acceptance. So mindful awareness is this idea that we are always thinking about the outcomes. What does this mean? That what just happened to me? Is it good, or is it neutral, or is it bad? And we're always trying to categorize our experiences instead of just letting life flow. So instead of just what just occurred and what are the learning experiences in it and how does it shape my future goals, we just want to label. And the more you label, the more you box yourself in. If it's neutral or bad, well, there's not much you can do about it, right? But if it's something that you can take things from, extract wisdom from, right? And you're calling this session Wisdom Wednesday, so there's always something you can extract wisdom from in every experience. So parking the what ifs and taking a more neutral perspective psychologically to what happens to you on a day-to-day basis, including the successes, including the failures, including everything in between, can be a much more productive way to get the most out of your experiences. So that's mindful awareness. And one way to do that is by using the senses to really turn the volume up in terms of what you see happening around you. So instead of thinking about, I really hope this doesn't happen, or I really hope he doesn't say that, just paying attention to, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you taste? What do you smell? And the more senses that are involved, the more vivid that experience. Right? And Carl Rogers, the psychologist, would always say, we don't pay attention deeply. Right? Like, we're not paying attention deeply to the people around us, the things happening around us, and this often holds us back. The second part of being mindful is mindful acceptance. This is the idea that, high pressure environments like entrepreneurship is all about imperfection. It's not a domain where you're going to go in and everything's going to roll out the way you imagined. And I think everybody listening to this who's interested in this topic clearly knows that. So then one of the most important aspects is, what are you preparing to do for the next setback or failure? Right? And often people either ignore it, they pretend like it didn't happen, or they suppress it. They will use different coping mechanisms to, again, not accept or face it. And the third aspect is actually voluntarily taking responsibility for the setback or failure. Again, thinking about, what is my responsibility in this? How do I have ownership over the circumstance? Whether it's something that didn't go quite according to plan or something that could have went better. What we find is, when you voluntarily accept whatever circumstance you're in, whatever situation you're born into, the macroeconomic conditions around you, this significantly improves your ability to respond to it. Because again, it doesn't make you feel like you're boxed in or cornered to react in a certain way. So mindful awareness and mindful acceptance are two very important aspects to just slowing things down, not getting caught up in the storm or the chaos around you, and focusing more on the process and the day-to-day experiences. A couple of other quick things that I'll mention in terms of what we found to be good best practices for navigating the uncertainty and the stressors that come with new ventures is detachment. Detachment is this idea that seldomly in life does one thing completely define you. But when you've invested so much into something, it's very easy to think that if it's not going the way you planned, or if there's setbacks involved, that it has a bigger impact on your overall being than it actually does. And so there's this interesting idea that detachment is not that you don't care, or that, for example, you don't own anything, but it's that nothing owns you. It's that you're able to let go and relinquish some of the pressures and stressors associated with achievement and success in the workplace, for example. The other aspect of detachment is, how do we recover, building on the last point, from failures and mistakes? So I think if we would all agree, mistakes are expensive. Mistakes are painful, correct? And so when you make a mistake in your personal life or in your business life, you feel that. We have to really work hard to detach or let go of what's happened in the past, because we can't go back and change it. It's outside of our locus of control, and let go. The analogy that I'd like for you to think about is, if you go through a toll, nobody likes going through tolls. You have to pay for it. Revisiting the past mistake that you made and just reimagining it again and again and again at nighttime, when you wake up, all throughout the day. It's like going through a toll, going up about 500 meters, and then saying, I think I'm going to circle back and go through again. You would never do that. You've already paid once. It was already painful once. But that's exactly what happens when we're too attached to anything. A business venture is something. It can also be something in your personal life. It can also be something in your social life. So we have to learn how to let go of the imperfections that naturally are going to come with some of these experiences. So along with slowing things down, trying to be present, we have to learn how to detach ourselves from only seeing ourselves as the founder or the CEO or the person who has to make this work. And the last thing I think can be processed a little bit deeper, but it's very important as you're starting a new venture or an entrepreneurship journey to do what's called staying the course, which is often breakthroughs in creativity and innovation happen right after people think it's not possible. There's actually a psychological process for this. It's called the incubation phase, where you've worked on something for so long that you've come to an impasse. It's just like, there's no way I can figure this out. And then when you let go of it and walk away from it, your mind starts to make connections. Your brain never turns off. So when you walk away from a problem, driving home, going for a walk in the evening, you get those aha moments. It comes to you. And we don't really know how to readily explain that, but we know it happens because we've all experienced it. One of the things is the mind starts to make connections with long-term memory, what you've learned in the past, only when you are recovering and resting from actively working on a problem. Perhaps this is something we can cover on a future webinar because the literature is so rich on it. But the lesson from it is you have to really fight to stay the course and not give up when you feel like you've reached an impasse, because you never know when the breakthrough will come. And the last thing that I just want to kind of touch upon, again, we can't go into too much detail because we're just doing, we're just kind of introducing these concepts, but there's something in social work and psychotherapy called the window of tolerance. And I find this very interesting because what they argue is when someone is trying to overcome a problem, let's say it's an addiction or a form of anxiety, which would be like an extreme example of the stress that we feel when we're facing challenges at work. There's two extremes. One is hyperarousal. There's too much going on, right? Like there's too many work hours and there's not enough recovery in the system. And so you just feel overwhelmed. And there's no way you can do good, qualitative, high-level mental work when you're overwhelmed. But there's also something called hypoarousal, where you're just passive. The negatives are building up. And because of what we just talked about, you feel resigned and defeated. And where you want to be is sort of in the middle, what they call the window of tolerance. And it's this idea that to grow, you or your business or your venture, you have to embrace a certain amount of uncertainty, but not too much. If you just take insane risks, right, and just do things that are unrealistic, it's going to backfire. But if you take no risks and just always play it safe, it's also going to backfire. So this window of tolerance is this balanced approach where you feel uncomfortable for sure, and it will activate your nervous system, the fight or flight system. You will feel it. And when you're in front of people, you might feel the heartbeat or the anxiety. But if you can accept that uncertainty, again, voluntarily, then that's something that can really push the envelope in terms of leveraging the stress and anxiety into better performance. And we know this from exposure therapy, this idea that the more you have to slowly build up the resilience to face the challenges around you. If you're, mortally terrified of an elevator, you don't just take someone and throw them inside an elevator. You show them a picture and they feel it and they get comfortable eventually. And maybe you walk close to one. Then maybe you go press the button. Then maybe you put one foot in the door and slowly you build up the resilience. So what does that mean in terms of new ventures? Well, how can you scaffold up? How can you expose yourself incrementally to risk and uncertainty so that you don't feel overwhelmed, but you're also not stagnant? And I'll finish with just a couple of quotes, again, from a psychological perspective, that I think the take home is there's a lot of stress and anxiety around us, for sure. But we have to start to get comfortable with some of this discomfort. So Sigmund Freud said that you have to go into your past. You have to iron those things out. You have to acknowledge the mistakes. You have to take ownership over them. Otherwise, how can you make a corrective measure? Carl Jung said that often what you want most is to be found where you least want to look. So you have to play out the worst case scenario. What if this venture doesn't work? What if this isn't successful? What if they don't buy in? And then lastly, Carl Rogers again said that we have to learn how to communicate about these difficult things. Communicate honestly about these difficult things. These are the kind of conversations we need to start having, like, what are the risks here? What's the uncertainty? How are we going to combat it? What if it doesn't work out? And again, paradoxically, working through those things doesn't make you more stressed. It's actually curative because you let it filter through instead of just kind of like putting it on the back burner or having it gnaw or eat away at you in the back of your mind. So in sum, there's a lot of things that can impact our ability to navigate new ventures, uncertainty, stress associated with creativity and innovative tasks. These are just some things to hopefully get you thinking and start to think about how these things impact your personal experiences and day-to-day endeavors. So with that, that's focusing on the psychological aspect of it. I'll pass it to Shane to talk about the holistic version of physical, nutritional, and overall wellness and how it is impacted by these issues.
All right, thanks, Faizan. So one of the questions we get often is, there's a lot to health and wellness. It's just such a broad topic. And what we really try and do is we break it down into 4 pillars. So mental, which Faizan just went over, physical, nutritional, and experiential. So the experiential one is the most difficult one to quantify, so to speak. But really, it includes things like the relationships, the purpose, the driven, the drive, the motivation, the things that, and we try and make what we do on the mental, physical, and nutritional side very embedded into what you do. So that's the experiential piece. So I want to start out with a little bit of and the other piece of this is that it's about performance. Everything that we do, and that's why I called the company Performance Institute, is we look at the research, we look at what are the best practices in these 4 pillars to be able to get people to perform at their best. Because the research is quite clear that if, from a business perspective, and Faizan and I were lucky enough to work at the School of Business at Queen's for many years. We'd work with 1,200 to 1,400 students every year doing master's programs and business entrepreneurship, things like that. And, one of the things that people would often say is, one, I don't have time for this, all of these types of things. And the question would be, why is this part of the School of Business? The program that I managed was a program called the Fit to Lead program. And so we believe that, if you look after yourself mentally, physically, and nutritionally, that you're going to perform at a higher level, both inside the classroom and outside. And so you as business owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs, we've worked with all of those people over the years. And that's the reason that the Fit to Lead program existed. That's why we set up the Performance Institute after I retired. So one of the things that we really look at is over those 20 years is to look at some of the things that were common. So I'm going to give you those in a second, but let me just take a quick step back and give you philosophically how I approach working with a client or working with a problem. So the first thing is, I believe everybody needs to have a quote. And so, you may have a quote that you use in your daily life. You may not have a quote. If you don't, I think you should find one. So think about maybe just for a second, what's the quote that you live your life by? And it might be something spiritual, it might be something financial, it might be something, from a family perspective. But here's my quote. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Okay, I'll say that one more time. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now, what do I mean by that? Do I mean, oh, the glass is just half full? No, I'm actually talking about physically, in some cases, looking at things from a different perspective. So if I'm looking at the ground and Faizan is facing me and I see a 6, Faizan's going to see a 9. Well, who's right? Well, we're both right. Okay? Until I actually physically go around and look at it from his perspective, I'm only going to see it from my perspective. So that's the way we approach all of the things that we do. The research in health and wellness, is pretty broad, but there's a lot of things that have changed. If you think just on the nutrition side of things, if you're old enough, like me, eggs have been in, eggs have been out, a million times. Carbs have been in, carbs have been out. Protein's been in, protein's been out. So things change over time. And I think it's important to kind of recognize that we need to look at things from different perspectives, because it's far from settled science. There's some best practices, but it's far from settled science. So that's the first thing. So that's my quote. So, I hope you have a quote that you can kind of look at. And I not only look at that quote just from, working with clients and business, it's what I do. So when I'm on the golf course and I hit a bad shot, I'd look at now as an opportunity instead of, something that was something that happened to me. So again, you have to change the perspective of how that works. The second thing is, not everybody has to have a formula, but I do have one. And this is, again, what I work with and work with myself on having is, and the formula is very simple. I'm a simple person. A plus S equals R. Okay, so just 3 letters. Okay, A plus S equals R. Well, R, I think we can probably all appreciate, is results. Okay, so we're in a results-driven business. Okay, so the R is the results part. So the A, and I've done this with thousands of students over the years, I'd ask them, what's an A word that would represent the A in my formula, A plus S equals R? And there's a lot of really good A words, okay? But my A for the formula is ability. You have the ability to do whatever you want. Think about kind of what you're doing right now. Obviously you have the ability to do that. You maybe didn't at one time, but you built up the ability. You had the goals to go do that. I wanted to become a golf pro in my retirement. Well, I have the ability to do it. I have to practice a lot. I had to do a lot of different courses, and it's a 4 or 5 year process to do it. So I have to set up the structure to do that, which ties into the S part. So if you've got the ability, you've got the R, what's that S in the middle of the formula? And that's the strategy. Okay, so the strategy piece of this, we're in business. We all have to have a strategy. If you want to do something, you have the ability to do it, to get the result you're looking for. You just have to figure out the right strategy. So that's the way I approach all things that we work with, whether that's working with a client working on a golf swing, or that's working with a client trying to improve their health and wellness metrics, or they would like to lose some weight, or they'd like to change some other aspect of their life. We have to have a strategy that goes along with that. So that's just a little bit of a perspective of how I approach things that hopefully will give you a bit of an idea where I'm going with this. So, I'm old enough to kind of have a Letterman top 10 remembrance of kind of that show over the years. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Having 20 plus years of working with entrepreneurs and clients, I want to tell you the things that come up almost every time within a coaching conversation. So here we are. So hopefully some of these resonate with you. The first one is every journey begins with a first step. And so most of you pick stuff that is way too hard. Okay? So hopefully you don't do it in your business life, but certainly in the health and wellness field, people really kind of, if I'm going to start running, I'm going to do a marathon. If I'm going to, start to eat better, whatever that means, I don't know what that means, they're going to become a vegetarian. So they immediately jump to the conclusion of what they want to be without actually thinking about the process and what it takes to get there. So, hey, what's wrong with a 5K? Why not start with that? What's wrong with, I haven't run before, but I want to do a marathon? how about just going out for a walk? Why do we have to jump right to the marathon? That's what I find within the health and wellness side. People jump right to the conclusion and go to the hardest thing possible. So again, remember that, every journey begins with that first step. You probably experienced this within your business setup. You didn't immediately get to 1,000 customers coming through the door. There was a process that took place. So that would be the first, thing that I would say. The other is time. And again, as busy entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs, we've worked with them all. That question comes up really frequently. I don't have time. And what I would always kind of come back with, because again, I want them to look at it from a different perspective. We often say it's a 180 view. And, everybody has 168 hours a week. Okay. So if you then think about that 168 hours a week, and you break it down to, okay, well, I want to sleep 7 or 8 hours. Okay, that comes off. And we actually do a little analysis for the week of where you're spending your time. You'll be surprised at the places that you find that you actually do have time. And I'm not suggesting you waste time. We all waste time. But when we kind of think about it from a whole week's perspective, or we just look at it from a month, we don't see that there's small windows of opportunity for us to be able to be a little bit more healthy, be a little bit more mindful about some of the exercise choices that we do. So again, looking at that. The other piece that goes along with that, again, recognizing we all have the same number of hours, is that we need to be looking and treating our health and wellness time and our choices on nutrition just the same as we would with our business decisions. We need to schedule them in. We need to make sure that they are programmed into our day and our week. So, the way I often do is, if I know I need to kind of get in X number of exercise sessions a week, I'll plug them into my day timer. Now, I'm, again, dating myself a little bit. I used to have one that was an actual paper version. Now it's all electronic, but it's there. I schedule it just like a meeting. And it's then sacred because it's in my schedule. People can't book a coaching session with me in that time frame because I've booked that off. If you don't ever write anything down or put stuff in there, it's just going to get missed. So the next question that goes along with that usually is, when should I exercise? Or it's like, it doesn't matter. If you're a morning person, exercise in the morning. I hate exercising in the morning. I'm an evening exerciser, but work out when it works best for you. Getting up at 5 a.m. because that's what people on the internet do, or 4 a.m. or 3 a.m., which, because 5's not good enough. Some people have to get up at 3. Those are all just, again, they're trying to get some clicks, but it's also probably not realistic. So hopefully you recognize that. There are lots of people that get up at 5 a.m. every day and do their exercise session. That's great. That's for them. I'm not that person. I like to be 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night exercising. That's just me. So that's the 168-hour work week. The next thing is the habit-based approach. And this has been a game changer as far as how we approach working with people. It now gives us that strategy. And so you may think, oh, it's like I've tried the habit-based approach. It didn't really work for me. So there's a couple things that may have kind of got you derailed with that. Is most of the time we start to try and do everything all at the same time. And then we end up really doing none of them. Okay, so if you just write down a list of all the things that you'd like to change, okay, whether it be nutrition or exercise or areas of your life. On the mental side, I'd like to start doing some meditation, things like that. Once you start to understand that aspect of it, you can then figure out what it is that you want to do, write it down, and then come up with a game plan for your sessions. But take a look at them and then go to the easiest one, okay, which brings us to the next thing. But if you think about that, within 26 weeks, or 26 habits in a year is what you're going to end up with if you go every 2 weeks. So the research is pretty clear. Start one habit and go, hang on a sec, I got a lawnmower going in my background. It's a little disconcerting. All right, if he does my lawn, that'd be better. But if you go for a year and working on this schedule of every 2 weeks, changing your habit, that you're going to have 26 new habits. Now, if I said to Faizan, over 20, could you change 26 things about yourself, to make you a better person? And he's a great person already. But, if we wanted to do that, would that be a huge change in who he is? Yes. So again, we look at it's almost like the dollar cost averaging thing. It's change over time. So if we can change 26 things over a year, that's a huge amount of difference. So keep that in mind, that the habit-based approach is something that's really important to do, but it's important to do the right way. Don't try and do 15 things all at once. When you do one, that's the evidence is clear on that one. That one you'll be able to stick with. And then the next piece of this is to start with the low-hanging fruit. So look at your list of things that you want to change, okay? And invariably, people will pick the most difficult thing and start with that. And what happens then is you're likely going to fail because it's the hardest one, and then you'll never get to any of the other 25. And so start with the easy ones. And this is also kind of for me as a coach when I'm working with somebody, it's referred to as readiness for change. Faizan wants to do something. He tells me he wants to do this thing. He's motivated to do it. And then I say, okay, let's write down 5 or 6 things that we want to do habit-wise to get to that point. And so he writes them down. And I said, okay, so let's go with this one. And he says, well, that one's too easy. And so, I've had this one several times over my lifetime. Somebody wants to change their body composition, whether it's to lose weight or what have you. I said, well, let's just start out with a multivitamin. Can you do a multivitamin every day for 2 weeks? Multivitamin is a nice little insurance policy on your nutrition. And 2 weeks later, I look at their chart and they filled it in 8-9 days out of 14. Well, here's the thing. If you can't go, we're not ready for let's become a vegan. Okay, so it's really important to make sure that we understand that we need to start with the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit. So what that's going to do is it's, when you get the first week, 2 weeks done and you've got that, you continue on with that habit. Okay, you don't just stop it at the end of 2 weeks. So again, by the end of the year, you've got 26 new habits. And so they take long time to ingrain into the system. But what I want you to do is to be looking at those, and that's going to build confidence. Every time you get a new habit that you're able to kind of maintain, that's going to build momentum. And that makes it really easy for you to continue on with it because you're going to see those changes. So again, when you start with too hard, it means really nothing happens. You end up with none of them going on. So when it comes to your fitness, my approach is anything is better than nothing. Okay, now I play speed golf. I'm a PGA teaching professional. I run, obviously. I kayak. I do all sorts of stuff. If I want to go to the next level, then I have to do more. Okay, or I have to be more strategic in what I'm doing as far as the actual planning of what I'm currently doing. Okay, but if you're doing nothing, if your current fitness level, and believe me, this is probably 80% of the people that I would work with on a daily basis didn't really have any fitness plan or nutrition strategy. So, just again, getting them to do something is better than nothing. So if you're somebody that, is mostly works on the computer and doesn't get a lot of movement each day, just get moving. You can actually do jumping jacks at the computer, a couple times an hour, or even just start off with once an hour, doing some air squats, just sitting here. I'm at a standing desk to hopefully improve a little bit of movement as my day goes on. Those things make a big difference. I know Faizan's famous for his walks, every hour. So he'll get up and he'll go around his neighborhood for a block. He doesn't go for a marathon. He just kind of does his thing and then comes back and his mind is clear. He's kind of ready to go on to the next task. So again, it's not about, I've seen so many people start off with the greatest of intentions and God bless you, but you get 1 week into your fitness program and it's too much. You didn't plan it well enough. It takes too long. your body hurts all over the place, and it's like, this isn't working for me. Well, I guarantee after a week, nothing is going to work for you as far as nutrition or fitness. They take a long time for changes to take place. So again, there are no kind of quick fixes on that. And again, if you are fit, you have to figure out, okay, what else do I need to do to kind of reach my goals? So number 6 is don't exercise to lose weight. Let me repeat that. Don't exercise with the idea to lose weight. So there's no amount of exercise for the most part that you can do that is going to outdo a bad diet. Okay, so which is to say, if you consume a real high number of calories, then it doesn't really matter what exercises that you're doing. It's a losing battle on that side of things. The nutrition portion is such a key part of that weight loss equation. Exercise absolutely is supportive of that, and the habits and the mindset that goes into that piece of it, exercising along with nutrition, very beneficial. So I'm not suggesting don't exercise for that purpose, okay? But make sure that you understand the limitations of exercise, because what happens is that often, if you look at the cost of running a mile or exercising for 30 minutes and you look at the number of calories burned, you're going to be very disappointed very quickly. Okay, so if that's your only metric to determine whether you're going to be losing weight, unfortunately, the body doesn't work that way, that we have to exercise off every calorie. We have generally energy requirements that aren't, even when we're sleeping, we're burning calories. So good news is we don't have to exercise every calorie off that we eat. However, what I would say is be careful about making that your main priority about kind of losing weight on that side of things. So again, do a little bit more than what you're currently doing. So that gets back to that other one. So get going on something. So the other piece that goes along with that is people often feel when they're exercising that they can now eat a little bit more. They deserve it. They've done their job. I can now have that second portion of that. And again, that really makes it difficult, and sometimes on the psychological side negates the gains that they might have already had. So number 7 is one of my favorite books. It's by Michael Pollan, and it's The Case for Food. And at the very start of the book, he gives the whole thing away. And it's within the first page. It says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. Okay? He says, now I got to fill in the rest of the book with the why of what I've come up with. And, what I'd have to say is the interesting thing is we actually have to define what food is these days. So food, if you kind of go to the grocery store, typically is kind of in that one section. It's called the produce section, right? Or it's around the outside. So my definition of food is food doesn't need a label to tell you what it is. Okay? So if it has 15 different ingredients, it's still food, but it's more of like a food-like substance. The less ingredients, for the most part, the better. Okay, so if you can pronounce most of the ingredients, that's even a better thing. So when I'm talking about the statement mostly plants, I'm referring to not becoming a vegetarian. I said mostly plants. Get more plants into your diet, and it doesn't mean don't eat meat. Okay, that's not what that's suggesting at all. And then the not too much really relates to the previous one. Okay, so that's what I would say, focus on kind of that side of thing. And then I would say don't major in the minors. Okay, that's what I see so many people doing. They're working on a detox diet, or they were told not to eat bananas because they do whatever with their glycemic index or something like that. It's like, and yet they're having Pop-Tarts for breakfast. So get the main stuff figured out first before you get into the subtle nuances of micronutrients. Get the macro stuff done first. And again, keep it simple. Eat food, mostly plants, not too much. Try and figure out strategies to get more plants in if you're not a big plant eater. Try to figure out strategies to decrease your portion sizes. There's lots around that. Then number 8, become a food agnostic. Okay, so there are all sorts of food camps. There's none of them that have any proven approach better than one or the other. Okay, so I think it's important to kind of recognize that, vegetarian, vegan, paleo, high protein, low protein, all of those diets, they all have kind of their central tenets of why they believe what they believe. And some of them can be successful in short term or in some other areas. There are some advantages on some medical conditions with specific diets. Obviously, if you have food sensitivities and things like that, then you have to factor that in. But just keep that involved. That's a bit of a slippery slope sometimes when we get kind of pregnant or get very delved into one specific diet, and that becomes the gospel. It's almost like a religion. And so this one really quick, for weight gain and weight loss, when we're talking about body composition, it's still about calories in, calories out. Don't make it any more complex than that. Yes, there are subtle nuances to that with the micronutrients and stuff like that, but don't, it's still at the end of the day, if you're looking to gain weight, you need to eat more calories than you take in, or you need to eat more calories than you expend, and the opposite. You have to get rid of more calories exercising or doing more things than you take in from the weight loss side of things. So just keep it simple that way. The last thing is have a passion for what you do. Okay? No matter what it is, find a passion, figure out how to get that into your health and wellness profile. So, figure out how to include a little bit more, nutrition. So strategize it a little bit. Maybe it's just planning. Make sure that you get a little bit more exercise than you're currently getting. But have a passion. Try and figure it out. Like if you like being outside, make sure you schedule some walks. Go out and enjoy nature. So that's kind of my top 10 things that I have come across over my 20 plus years of working with clients. I think the end of this is people can make it really complex and really difficult to understand. Our job with Performance Institute is to take all of that research and all of those things that you kind of read in the paper and, if you just do this, you're going to get this result, and make sure that we're clear on how that actually applies in the real world, because you as business entrepreneurs and people that have a busy life need to have something that's easy to do, and make sure that you kind of follow some type of a formula to be able to get the strategy that you're looking for the results that you need. So with that, thanks a lot for listening to our session. I hope you got something out of that. Feel free to contact us at any time if you need anything, and we'll leave it at that point. Faizan, do you have anything to add? All good.